Hey guys, how you going? Hope you're all doing very well. This afternoon I'm going to be doing another movie review. This movie is a horror comedy from the United States, English language, released in the year 2020, directed by Josh Rubin, and this film is called Scare Me. So Scare Me is about a horror writer. He is stuck for ideas. He's got a very stressful life in his city life, so he decides to go out to a cabin in the woods in order to try and get some alone time and come up with inspiration for an idea. So when he gets there, he goes for a walk in the woods and he meets up with a very famous horror writer. Now she is a bestseller, so everything that this guy aspires to be. So he's kind of like the biggest fan of this woman. He's very awkward around her. She's kind of standoffish. She's trying to get rid of him, but as they're walking through the woods, they get to know each other a little bit, and then they go their separate ways. But then when nightfall approaches, a massive storm hits that causes the power to go out. So this guy gets a knock on his cabin door, and it's the horror writer, the successful horror novelist. And so she says, can she hang out until the power comes back on? So he doesn't have anything else to do that's any better. So he says yes, and then she comes up with the idea that they're going to tell each other horror stories and try and scare each other. So this is how the night's going to be spent, but then along the way there's fun reenacting their stories, but then all of a sudden the discomfort from coming to terms with who they are as novelists, and not only novelists but also people, starts to cause questions, which ultimately starts to cause a little bit of tension. So what that tension is something you're going to have to find out for yourself, because that's as far as I'm going with my synopsis. Now my thoughts on Scare Me. This is a movie that is very charming. It is a movie that does have its place as far as watchable films are concerned, but it's a movie that I can see is going to anger a lot of people and bore a lot of people if you don't go into it with the right expectations. Now, this is not a straight-out horror film. I wouldn't necessarily call it a scary horror film, and it's more so a movie about writing. It's a movie about creativity and coming up with ideas and the power of campfire horror stories. This is a film where it took me back from my childhood when we'd tell each other scary stories, and whoever's was the scariest would ultimately win the day. So there's a lot of nostalgia. It is a trip down memory lane, and therefore it produces a lot of charm. And I thought the charm was intensified through the very funny script. It's a very, very well written film, and the characters are very quirky, and straight away you get the quirky nature that Josh Rubin wants to create, and that is down through the characters, their quirky expressions, their quirky body language, and ultimately the very strange atmosphere that the script creates. And so I thought I really like the world. I really like the setting that this film takes place in, and I was really excited to see where the creativity would go. And so, as I said, it is a very creative film, and it's definitely a risk to market a film as a horror comedy where it's not really a traditional horror film at all. And so it is a love letter to horror fandom. It's a love letter to horror creativity, horror stories, and good old-fashioned scaring people. And what is fear? And the fear that is emulated through a scary story, but also a fear that is emulated through personal being a person, being a human being, and coming to terms with truths that you might not necessarily want to deal with, but ultimately sooner or later you're going to have to deal with them, and that can be scary too. So scary on a nostalgic level, but also a little bit scary as far as a personal being is concerned. So that therefore it doesn't translate to a straight out horror film. It's not a very scary movie, but I will say the creativity in the improvisation that these characters have reenacting their stories I thought was actually quite quirky. It was really well done, and it was quite clever. But as I said, it's not really a scary movie. So you've got really good sound effects that make these reenactments come to life, and the facial expressions from these characters, as I said, is just really, really strange, and it's just a lot of fun. As I said, it's definitely a trip down memory lane, and it's a movie that a lot of people will appreciate. But as I said, you have to go in there with the right expectations. Don't expect a traditional horror film, because it's certainly not that. It's a very strange film, but it's a movie that does have that charm, as I said, and there's a certain level of heartwarming quality that I definitely think belongs in a place of a generic sort of horror genre. Is that a lot of horror is recycled over and over and over and over, hitting you over the head with just stuff that you can predict. But this movie does take a much different approach, and that's what I liked about it the most. Is it's trying something a little bit different. It's not necessarily a straight out horror film, but it is a love letter to horror fans. It's a love letter to the idea of being scared, and that's what I really liked about it. So it's a charming horror film, but if I have a problem with it is that it just doesn't have any real lasting quality. It's not an overly memorable film. At the end of the day I thought, okay, well that was alright, but unfortunately it just stays at alright. It's not a great movie by any stretch of the imagination, and it's because I don't really think it just doesn't have that traditional way about it, and so it's not a popcorn horror film. It's not a horror film that you're going to watch again probably, and so it is pedestrian. It's middle of the line, but it's definitely not a bad movie. It's worth at least one watch, but but I highly doubt that you're going to want to watch it again. So Scare Me is definitely a different kind of horror film. It is very funny, so it does deliver on its promise of being a comedy. But I wouldn't say it's a complete waste of time as far as horror is concerned, because, as I said, it's a nostalgic throwback to what made us horror fans in the first place and the creativity that, creative people can come up with. But unfortunately, as I said, the harsh realities and how scary they can be at the same time. So the acting was very good, the script was very good, it's well directed, very well made as far as production is concerned. Therefore, I'm going to give Scare Me 3 stars. Alright guys, that's it for my review. Hope you enjoyed it. Next time, keep watching movies, and I'll see you later.